I wake before the sun, the quiet hum of the city not yet awake, and for a moment the world feels still. I listen to the slow breath of my daughter in the next room, and I whisper a promise to the faint light behind the curtains today. I will keep going even when my hands shake, even when my heart feels heavy, because this dream is all I have, and it is enough. I press my palm against the window, the glass cool against my skin, and I see the first hint of orange pushing through the skyline, that small fire that reminds me every single morning that new beginnings are born from long nights of fear. I walk to the kitchen, the floor cold beneath my feet, the scent of coffee wrapping around me like comfort, and I close my eyes, remembering the days when even coffee felt like a luxury. Back then everything was harder, the bills stacked like quiet threats on the counter, the doubts louder than any encouragement, but somewhere beneath all that noise I could still hear the voice inside me saying, "You can build something, you can change everything." I used to whisper it under my breath when my daughter slept, when the apartment felt too small and the world felt too big. I would write ideas on scraps of paper, recipes, drawings, plans for a business that no one believed I could start, because who was I, just a single mother with no savings, no partner, and no safety net. But every time fear tried to drown me, I thought of her, the way she smiled when I told her stories about strong women who made their own way, and I knew I could not teach her to believe in herself if I could not first believe in me. So I started small. I baked at night while she slept, sold my cakes to neighbors and co-workers, the smell of sugar and hope filling the rooms of our little home. I remember the first time someone paid me for what I made. It was only a few dollars, but it felt like the world had finally opened its doors. I kept going even when my body ached, even when I burned a batch or ran out of ingredients, because I had tasted possibility. And it was sweeter than anything I had ever known. As weeks turned into months, I learned more about people, about kindness, about how a simple smile can build trust, and how trust can build a dream. I started delivering orders before dawn, balancing boxes on my arms, walking through the fog that rose from the streets, and I would tell myself, this is how foundations are built, one step, one delivery, one act of faith at a time. Still, there were nights I cried, quietly afraid that I was chasing something impossible, but I would dry my tears, pick up my notebook and plan again, because giving up was never an option. I watched my daughter grow, and every milestone of hers became a reason to push harder. Her first day at school, her drawings on the fridge, each one seemed to say, "Mama, keep going." And I did. When I finally saved enough to rent a small kitchen space, it felt like stepping into sunlight after years in the dark. I painted the walls myself, the color of dawn, so I would always remember where I began. I hung a sign with my business name handwritten, imperfect but mine, and as I stood there breathing in the scent of flour and dreams, I whispered, "This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning." And every morning after that I would unlock that little kitchen before the world woke up, the air still cold against my skin, and I would stand there for a moment to feel the weight of what I was building. Sometimes it felt too heavy, sometimes I looked around at the empty shelves and wondered if I had made a mistake, but then I would think about the nights when I had nothing but an idea, and I would remind myself that progress is never loud, it grows in silence like a seed. Under the soil I would mix batter and hum quietly to keep the fear away, the scent of butter and sugar becoming my anthem, each batch a prayer whispered into the dawn. Orders began to come slowly. One neighbor told another, one teacher told a friend. Soon I was running to keep up, answering calls while packing lunches, checking homework. Between batches I was tired in ways I had never been before, but it was the kind of tired that comes from purpose, not from defeat, and that difference kept me alive. People started to see me differently. They saw not just a single mother, but a woman building something with her own two hands. Some came to buy, some came to help. One man offered me used equipment, another woman taught me about bookkeeping. I learned to accept help without shame, to see generosity not as pity, but as connection, and every person who stepped through my door became part of the story we were writing together. There were still setbacks, days when supplies ran out, weeks when sales were low, moments when I stared at the numbers and felt the familiar pull of fear whispering that I could lose it all. But each time I stood in that fear, I remembered the promise I made by the window that first morning, that I would keep going no matter what, and somehow that promise became a kind of armor. My daughter loved the kitchen. She would draw little hearts on the boxes before I delivered them, and sometimes she would sit on the counter watching me work, her eyes wide as if she were seeing magic. And maybe she was, because love and effort can turn even the smallest dream into something extraordinary. She would say, "Mama, one day we will have a big shop with lights and music and people from everywhere," and I would smile, pretending not to believe it too much. But deep down I held on to her words, because children have a way of seeing the truth before we do. The first big break came unexpectedly. A local event needed desserts for a fundraiser. I stayed awake for 2 days straight, baking, frosting, decorating, praying everything would turn out right. When I walked into that hall carrying trays of my work, I felt small among the professionals. But when people tasted what I made, they smiled and asked where my bakery was. I told them it was just me, just one woman in a rented kitchen, and they clapped as if I had already made it. That night, I walked home through the quiet streets, the city lights shimmering like stars, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel proud. Soon after that, things began to move faster. I got more orders than I could handle. Sometimes I would fall asleep sitting in the chair, too exhausted to even dream. But I never stopped. The rhythm became my life, the mixing, the baking, the packaging, all a dance between exhaustion and hope. There were moments when I thought about the man who left when I was pregnant, the voices that told me I could not do this. I would think of them as I lifted another heavy tray and whisper, "You were wrong," not out of anger but gratitude, because every doubt they gave me became fuel for my fire. Years passed and my daughter grew taller than the counter. The little hearts she once drew on boxes turned into designs for my logo. She began helping with social media, taking pictures, editing videos, posting them online. One day, a popular page shared her post, and overnight messages flooded in, orders from across states, people writing about how they saw themselves in our story, how they too were trying to rebuild their lives, how hope tasted a little sweeter when they read our name. I realized then that this was no longer just a bakery. It was a reminder that broken beginnings can still rise like bread in the oven, slowly, steadily, beautifully. I realized then that everything I had done, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer, every tear shed in silence, had led me here to this moment where strangers knew my name, not because I was special, but because I refused to stop believing even when no one else did. I would wake each morning before dawn, still out of habit, but now instead of fear there was a calm joy, a quiet gratitude that filled my chest like the sunrise spreading across the sky. My daughter would join me sometimes, and we would work side by side, our laughter mingling with the sound of the oven door closing, and in those moments I understood that success was not the money, not the followers, not even the storefronts that began to carry my desserts. It was this, the togetherness, the peace that comes when your struggle becomes your strength. One afternoon I received an invitation to speak at a local women's center. They wanted me to tell my story. I almost said no, because who was I to inspire anyone? I was still learning, still stumbling, but my daughter looked at me with those same bright eyes and said, "Mama, you have to go. They need to hear what you went through." So I went, my heart pounding, my palms sweating. I stood in front of a room full of women, some with tears already in their eyes, some holding notebooks, and I spoke without a script. I told them about the nights I wanted to quit, the mornings I started over, the dreams that seemed foolish until they weren't. I told them that pain can be the soil where strength grows, and that you do not have to be fearless to keep moving forward. When I finished there was silence, then applause, then hugs from women who said they felt seen, and in that moment I understood that stories have power, not because they are perfect but because they are honest. From that day on I began to share more of my journey online. I didn't have fancy equipment or a perfect voice, just my truth spoken softly between batches of cookies and frosting. People began to listen. They wrote to me about their own journeys, single fathers, college students, widows, dreamers, all of them carrying pieces of my story in their own hearts, and somehow that connection made the world feel smaller and kinder. I expanded the business slowly, carefully, every decision rooted in gratitude, not greed. I hired 2 women who had been struggling to find work, both single mothers themselves, and together we built a rhythm that felt like family. We shared meals during late nights, laughed over failed recipes, and celebrated small victories with coffee and music. The bakery began to smell not just of sugar but of hope. One winter morning, as snow fell gently outside, I received a letter. It was from a large retailer offering a partnership. My hands trembled as I read it. I had dreamed of such an opportunity but never truly believed it would come, yet here it was, proof that patience and persistence had finally opened doors I had once only imagined. I walked home that evening under the streetlights, snow crunching beneath my boots, the city wrapped in silence, and I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stood by the window whispering promises to herself, and I wanted to tell her it all worked out, that she did not just survive, she bloomed. I reached my building, climbed the same 7 flights of stairs I had climbed so many times before, and opened the door to the warmth of home, my daughter waiting with a mug of cocoa, her smile the same as when she was little. And I realized that success is not about reaching the top, it is about learning to keep walking even when your legs shake. As time went on I found myself looking less at the numbers and more at the faces of the people who walked through my doors. I saw tired eyes that carried stories like mine, people who had been told they were not enough, who came searching for a reason to believe again, and sometimes all it took was a warm slice of cake and a quiet smile to remind them that they were still standing, that they were still worthy. I learned that healing does not always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes in the smallest gestures, a kind word, a shared laugh, a moment of rest. My daughter grew into a young woman, bold and radiant. She told me one day that she wanted to study business so she could help women like me start their own journeys. I felt tears rise as I listened, because in her voice I heard every sleepless night, every struggle turned into something beautiful. She had watched me build from the ground, and now she was ready to build for others, and that was the greatest success of all. Years later, when I finally opened a small storefront on a busy street corner, I stood outside before the grand opening, the morning sun climbing above the skyline just like it had all those years ago when I pressed my hand against the cold glass of a tiny apartment window. The smell of the city, the hum of cars, the laughter of strangers, everything felt new yet familiar. I looked up at the sign above the door, my name written in elegant letters, the same name that had once been scribbled on a piece of paper in the quiet of the night, and I whispered again, this is just the beginning, because even after everything, even after the battles and the victories, I knew that growth never ends. Customers came, families, friends, strangers who had followed my story online. They filled the shop with warmth and chatter, and I moved among them with a heart full of quiet pride. Some recognized me and asked for photos, others shared how they had started their own small businesses because of something I once said, and each story they told became another thread woven into the fabric of this life I had created. When the crowd thinned and the evening light began to soften, I sat near the window watching the glow of the setting sun, the same sun that had risen on my hardest days. I thought about the woman. I once was the one who thought she was too broken, too small, too alone to create anything lasting, and I wanted to reach back through time and tell her that every scar would one day shine, that every doubt would one day fade into strength. Now when I wake before dawn, I no longer feel the ache of uncertainty. I feel gratitude, the kind that fills your lungs until you can hardly breathe, because you know how far you've come. I still whisper promises to the morning, but they are different now, softer, steadier. I tell myself to stay humble, to stay kind, to never forget the nights that shaped me. Sometimes young women write to me saying they are afraid to start, that they have no one to help, that they are too tired, too busy, too scared. And I tell them what I have learned: you do not need to see the whole path, you only need to take the next step. Courage is not loud, it is the whisper that tells you to try again, even after everything has fallen apart. And so I keep walking, I keep building, I keep believing, not because it is easy, but because it is real, because it is mine, because somewhere out there another woman is standing by her window watching the sunrise and wondering if she can do it too, and maybe one day she will hear my story and whisper to herself, if she did it, maybe I can too, and that is enough, that is everything.